Every now and then you step outside your comfort zone. Today's mine. All right, my story starts in 1970 when I was 8 years old. I was enjoying my status in life as being the sixth child, youngest male, in a family of 4 boys and 4 girls. I grew up on French Island, a small island in the middle of the Penobscot River where it passes through Old Town, Maine, just up the road here. Our home was a 4-room apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that my grandmother owned, and she lived on the 1st. We had a kitchen, we had a living room, a bedroom for my parents, and 1 bedroom, 5 beds for us 8 kids. Our bathroom was 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet, and all it had was a toilet and a sink. If you wanted to take a bath, you took it in this kitchen sink if you were small enough, and standing in front of it if you weren't. But this all changed in 1970 when my grandmother had a flimsy plastic shower installed in her bathroom on the 1st floor. This is where I would have my very first shower, but I was not alone. Once a week, on Saturday evening, we would all go downstairs to Nana's new shower. And to save money and hot water, all 4 boys would pile in and shower together, followed by my 4 sisters. And I remember this one particular Saturday evening, several months into this, when my mother was wiping me up with a towel, I asked her, "Mom, why does water sometimes turn yellow when you heat it up, like in Nana's new shower?" With a grin on her face and a sternness in her voice, she stood. She looked at my brothers and says, "If you boys need to pee, please face the wall and do so, and stop peeing on him." '70s left quite an impression on me. That year, I dreamt of walking the Appalachian Trail, building my own home, and going to Africa. And I'm pleased to say I did all 3. When I finished the Appalachian Trail, my son was by my side. Woo. He was by my side. And he was only 8 at the time. And for months before I left, he and I would spend countless hours going through all my gear, trying to figure out what I would take and what I would leave behind. He was even with me the night I set my tent up in the driveway to test it and my new sleeping bag out in the cold. It was 19 degrees that night. 2 days later, I jumped on a plane, flew to Atlanta, Georgia, found a ride to Springer Mountain, and started my journey back home. And along the way, I would meet one of my childhood friends again, myself. So I wouldn't see Madison again for 5 months until he met me in Monson, Maine, to hike with me for the 100-mile wilderness, and then he added 20 to get back to the top of Mount Katahdin. I thought my 30-mile days that I was enjoying was going to slow to 5 or 10. I was wrong. Madison proved himself to be quite a little hiker, with his first day being 15 miles, with his longest being 25 miles. Remember, he's only 8 at the time. While leaving the Appalachian Trail ending my Appalachian Trail was really difficult for me. Along the way, I would find myself just spontaneously crying. But I didn't quite understand what was going on. But it would prove to be the beginning of a very difficult transition back into my former life. And along the way, Madison would try to console me. "It's all right, Dad, we can come back." Or, "It's all right, Dad, we can invite these people back to our house." But I think the most profound conversation Madison and I had on that trail was my answer to his question, "Dad, do you regret anything on the Appalachian Trail?" And this was my story. I said, "Yes, Madison. Many times when I had to go in town to get more supplies, I would meet townspeople. Looking pretty grisly. They would ask me, what was I doing? And when I told them, some just wanted to spend more time with me. So they would invite me to go fishing with them, or to go rock climbing, or just float in a stream in an inner tube. But I often said no, because my trail was all about the miles and getting back home. I didn't realize at that moment all the gifts the trail had to offer until I fully embraced the life I was leaving there. So I told him, I said, man, if you feel safe and you like what's being offered, embrace the opportunity and be ready to tell an awesome story when you're done. Like I said, my transition back into my former life was really difficult. And 4 years later, I found myself going through a divorce. I felt like everything was out of control, and I looked for something familiar to hold on to. So I thought, how about a hike? Madison was 12, passionate about the outdoors, and you know what? Passionate about spending time with me. So we flew to the South Island of New Zealand for a 6-week hike. And 3 weeks into it is when we would meet Paul and Katerina and their 3 children. I remember it was early in the morning, and it didn't take long for these 4 kids to become best of friends. Later that afternoon, we arrived at a hut that they would be staying in, and Katerina invited Madison and I to stay with them. I wanted to decline, but it was obvious just how much he needed to spend time with kids his own age, so we stayed. Later that evening, the 4 kids opted out of the beds that were available in the hut for a bivouac they built outside in the brush earlier that evening. And I still remember the look on all 4 kids when Paul, Katerina, and myself kissed them all goodnight. And I thought, as I'm walking back to the shelter, I thought, oh my God, how simple life can be. Lying in a bivouac, staring at the stars, and telling a story seen through the eyes of a young person. At that moment, I found the peace I'd been looking for. The next day was Easter, and again, Katerina invited us to stay, this time enticed with a game of capture the flag, followed by a scavenger hunt, and ending with a big dinner they had made the day before and brought up with them. But this time, I declined, telling her that if we stayed, we would run out of food before we got to the next town. Well, Madison started in with all the reasons why we should stay. I with all the reasons why we needed to go. And our conversation got quite heated, and I figured we should probably step outside where we could talk a little more freely. And freely is exactly how Madison spoke. I knelt down. He stepped back and respectfully pointed his finger at me and said, I need you to hear me. You said, if I feel safe, and I like what's being offered, that I should embrace the opportunity and be ready to tell an awesome story. Well, Dad, I feel safe. I like these people, and I want to spend more time. Please, Daddy, please. It didn't take long for my eyes to fill with tears upon hearing my own advice coming back to me through my son's voice. I can still remember his skinny little arms wrapped around my neck, squeezing me as tight as he could, saying, oh, thank you, Dad, thank you. Well, later that afternoon, Madison and I found ourselves on the same team for the scavenger hunt, standing on the side of a very narrow gorge, 1,000 feet deep, with a cable stretched overhead, and attached to it is a metal basket with a bicycle contraption you use to pillow yourself from one side to the other. Our next clue is on that side. So we climb in. Look at this, Madison. This is incredible. He stood up, and for the second time that day, he pointed his finger at me and said, I told you this was a good time. I told you we would have fun. Out of fear, I brought my hands up to hold him back because I knew the hug that was going to follow was going to send us over the edge. I'm not sure who won that scavenger hunt that day, but I am sure Madison and I were winners. The next day, it was difficult saying goodbye to Paul and Katerina and the kids. We exchanged contact information. Katerina gave us some of their extra food, and it was enough for Madison and I to get to the next town. And as we left the hut, they were on one side of the valley, Madison and I were on the other, and as we walked further down the valley, the distance between us got greater and greater. We would look over, try to catch one more glimpse of our friends, occasionally waving when we saw them looking back. At one point, Madison, who was in front of me, stopped, turned around and looked, only to find my eyes were as damp as his. Without saying a word, we sat on the side of the trail and cried and watched our new friends walk out of sight. Thank you.